Diplo's and GIP's Geneva Briefings on Internet Governance webinar. For those of you that might be new to the webinars, in brief, we tend to have such a webinar every first Tuesday of the month, with the idea to review what has happened in previous month with regards to internet governance, and what can we expect in the upcoming months out of the activities and at least the scheduled developments. We all know that things happen ad hoc, as it happened in March. A couple of things that we couldn't envisage. The format of the webinar is that we basically try to sum up different messages and developments and look into the future, and then receive questions from you through the chat window. I will, in a way, host and guide through this updates, but we'll also have the involvement of Jovan Kurbalija, Director of DiploFoundation from Geneva, and Marilia Maciel from FGV from Brazil at some point. Whenever you feel like or you want to, please do send your questions and comments. Some of them we might refer to immediately, but most of them will probably leave for the questions and answers at the end of the webinar. Now, this is the third in a row of our Geneva briefings on internet governance, and we have titled it Ready, Steady, Go. There is an alternative, Get Set, Go, and it's usually used in cases of races. During the previous webinar, we've seen that the positioning of states and major actors in internet governance has started strongly, especially with regards to the Net Mundial meeting in Sao Paulo end of April. March has served to go beyond that, and to some extent we can see that most of the actors are really ready to run into Net Mundial dialogue and try to achieve the most possible. Now, we have done this illustration to try to, well, illustrate the whole readiness of ready, go of the actors. But then we realized that Net Mundial, of course, is more about football than the athletics. So we're just working on another illustration we hope to be able to show you soon, which is going to be more appropriate for this kind of the meeting. Now, before we move to the summary or review of the March developments, as we started in the previous webinars, we'll go through the review of the positions. We are trying to follow positions of the main players on this kind of the map, seeing or trying to see who of these actors are moving towards zone of possible agreement when it comes to internet governance, mostly mechanisms, but also principles, and which of these actors are maybe going further away from the zone of possible agreements. We've done some updates, and I will invite Jovan now, who is traditionally following this chart, to provide a brief update on what has happened since the previous Geneva briefing webinar, which is last month. How have the roles changed of certain players? Jovan, please.
Christian from the UN Economic Commission for Europe, and we are following the main lines of your introduction. And as you said, it's great that you introduced the metaphor of football and soccer, and that's in the spirit of Mundial. Well, this zoom out view is useful because we are overwhelmed by almost daily developments, and here we can step back and see what has happened since last month. And there are two major developments when it comes to the positioning. We had the United States with the March declaration moving closer to the center, basically by, as you're aware, indicating that opening the process of globalization of ICANN and oversight function. And there was also a move from India during the PhD work when it endorsed stronger intergovernmental arrangement for internet governance. There was the whole process is in flux, and there are different signals coming from the various actors, but those are, I would say, the major developments. We had also slight shift of European Union with the European Commission communication toward the zone of possible agreement. That would be the summary of the main movement development. Next slide, Vlada.
Yes, thank you. This is something that you wanted specifically to raise here, and to be honest, I'm also quite eager to listen to this particular disclosure of documents. I'm leaving it to you now.
The question is, do you know who is this man? If you know, please type into the chat box. I can, while we are waiting for the answer, I can help you by giving some hints that he was quite important person in early phase of ICANN and development of the current internet governance regime. And you will see why he's important today. And we try to get his name. Okay, then Vlad, move to the next slide, please. His name is Ira Magaziner. He was the person in the Clinton administration in charge of following the process of creation of ICANN when the DNS war started in between early technical community and the idea to commercialize the DNS functions. There were various proposals, and the war ended up with the establishment of ICANN in 1998. And the person who was the key in the negotiation process was Ira Magaziner. And here is one page from his documentation, which was published last Friday. And I think this event became completely unnoticed by internet governance community, which was very strange, because what was negotiated at that time, 96, 97, and what these documents are related to is crucial for the current negotiation. Because that period between 1994 and 1998 was crucial for the establishment of the ICANN. Later on, we have versus process and the other developments. But for the ICANN, it was formative period. Therefore, I suggest for all those of you who are interested in ICANN to go through his notes. As you can see, he made quite a few handwriting notes on the papers. And you will see that some of the dilemmas that existed at that time are again we are facing today, about the balance between different stakeholders, development of the mechanism. And it's a quite extended collection. I think there are more than 1,000 pages from his documentation. And as you see, I made a quick note, ancient history of the internet. And we're fortunate that while we're discussing the history of the internet, there are people who they're still alive, the people who made this history. But the famous Churchillian note is that the further backward you can look, the further forward you can see. And in ancient history of the internet, this was an extremely important period. Therefore, please pay attention and let us know your comments about Ira Magaziner's diary. Over to you, Vlada.
Thank you, Jovan. It's interesting knowing that, I mean, he's a US president, so his notes are in English. It will be much more difficult if he was using Cyrillic or Arab script or something like that. We'll definitely share the link to this document in the report from the webinar later on. So you'll have the chance to also, or you can just Google search and find it. This has been released, I think, yesterday or the day before. Moving on to March developments and trying to summarize what has happened. There have been quite some developments in March. Some of them we expected, some of them not really. One that might have surprised some, but has not surprised everyone, was the announcement of the US NTIA, who is basically the institution within the Department of Commerce of the US, in charge of the formal overseeing of the IANA function. Now, some of you, just to be clear, because there are too many acronyms there, I'll just briefly explain what the IANA function stands for. The IANA function is basically taking the registry or maintaining the registry of the internet addresses and IP numbers and other number parameters important for the work of the internet. So it's to the large extent it's a technical role, and in that sense, as some people from the NTIA mentioned, the IANA has this kind of clerical role in sense of the administration, technical role in sense of technically maintaining the databases of DNS and IP addresses, and the authorization function for changing any of these registries. The NTIA, or Department of Commerce of the US, basically has the authorization or final authorization for the changes in this, so to speak, unique internet address book, without which the internet couldn't work. Some have commented that basically the NTIA has the safety stop mechanism, that in case they don't want some kind of particular change to be introduced in this records of the numbers and IP and DNS numbers, NTIA can theoretically do it. This IANA function role, as I said, is mostly technical, but it has a strong political potential. In the background, in the history of the internet, it has been delivered by John Postel, a single person, and later on, this so-called IANA function has been assigned to ICANN. So, in a way, ICANN is the institution which is performing the IANA function. The change of the technical change of the root zone file, or the whole address book, the physical change of the file, is done by VeriSign, by the corporate sector, and for the last 10 years, as they say, it has been done without a mistake. So they are the publisher of the zone. Now, since 1998, when ICANN basically was established and given the function of IANA, US has been the authority, the overseeing authority of IANA function, and there have been a number of announcements of, in a way, transition of the IANA function to other institutions or the community, let's say. Now, this is not the first time that we hear about the transition, but this is probably one of the most solid and most strongest statements coming from US with regards to the transition of the IANA function from the US government to someone else. Now, we don't know who. The timeline that is set, as the NTIA has said, is till September 2015, when the current contract with the Department of Commerce will cease to exist. This seems quite a short term, which means now less than 2 years, year and a half, to try to do the transition, and there are many open questions about that. But at the ICANN meeting in Singapore, NTIA confirmed that if needed, this contract can be extended for another 2 years. So there is no intention to leave IANA without any oversight in case there is no good solution for this transition. NTIA has outlined a couple of principles that are guiding this transition. So they focus on multi-stakeholderism, and they underline that multi-stakeholder process needs to be involved in the future overseeing of IANA function. Security, stability, and resilience of the net and the DNS has to be maintained. There is a need for bringing a number of global, as they say, customers and partners in this transition process. And there needs to be an openness of the whole process, transparency, and so on. Adi Shehada, the CEO of ICANN, has said that, in a way, it is not searching for an organization or an institution that will replace the US role. It's rather searching for a mechanism. But it's still quite vague, and many question what does it mean. For instance, Khaled Patel, who is quite involved in the multilingual internet and in ICANN issues with regards to multilingualism, in his blog posted a couple of questions, including who is the global multi-stakeholder community that the authority is going to be transferred to. from the US. So what does that mean? Then what is the jurisdiction and other US impacts to the IANA and ICANN, even if the transition is made? Because if ICANN is the one who is still doing the function of IANA, ICANN is still operating under the US law. There was also an explanation by Fadi Shehade again that this is not a final decision, so the transition will take some time. He also said, and that's interesting, if we wonder whether this decision by NTA, the announcement, came as a response to NSA affairs and Snowden affairs, Fadi Shehade said no. This was not moved basically by the NSA affairs. It is something that has been prepared and announced and discussed for years. The second question about timing is whether the fact that it was announced in March and that it was too late to be formally put in the contributions for NetMundial, yet right in time for ICANN Singapore to be discussed, is something that matters. And in that sense, the NTA also mentioned that NetMundial is not going to be the place to discuss IANA transition, or not the exclusive place. Instead, ICANN process, and ICANN was invited to provide this kind of community discussion about IANA transition, whilst NetMundial will probably be one of the opportunities to involve developing countries and start the discussion. Last but not the least, it's interesting to note the communique of the ITU Secretary General, who of course welcomed the intention of the NTA for the transition of IANA function. And he again emphasized the global public good of the internet, which is something that the ITU has been pushing ahead in the recent, well, not only recent time, but specifically now towards the NetMundial. And he said that all nations and people should have an equal say in its running and development of the internet. He also mentioned that NetMundial would be one of the interesting and good places to discuss the IANA transition, and he linked it to the WSIS principles of inclusiveness of all nations and stakeholders from developing countries and developed world and so on. So he didn't explicitly refer to the ITU role or the intergovernmental organization or any concrete mechanism how or who might take over the oversight over IANA, but basically he referred to the public good, global public good, and the, in a way, internationalization, involvement, inclusiveness of all nations and stakeholders in this process. Jovan also mentioned, posted now in the chat window an interesting blog that he wrote about the IG mechanism, how internet governance could be fit within, and also the role of the Internet Governance Forum, including in this discussion. The second topic that came out was the position of India, which was raised basically during the end of February working group on enhanced cooperation within the Commission for Science, Technology and Development within the UNESCO. And India has been, to some extent, quiet ever since it was pushing ahead together with Brazil and South Africa for a joint approach towards internet governance. India has now seems to have moved towards kind of the intergovernmental solution to internet governance. And basically, India called for establishment of a global agency to manage the internet, something along the lines of the ITU. India did not specifically call for the ITU to do it, but possibly setting up an agency along the same lines. And they were quite precise that they were pushing for the multi-governmental, for the intergovernmental process with those of multi-stakeholderism rather than a multi-stakeholder solution or approach. In that sense, and that's why also we moved a little bit India's position on the first slide from today. Then one of the very important developments of last month was Brazil's Marco Civil, or the first or quite important civil law on internet in Brazil, which is in a way explicitly protecting the internet rights, including net neutrality, privacy, freedom of expression in Brazil. It has been pushed for a couple of years, but finally it has gone through the parliament. I think Marilia Maciel is with us here, and Marilia, if you're here, you might be probably the best person to briefly outline what Marco Civil, the internet, is bringing to Brazil and why it might become a showcase for possibly a law on this case in other countries. Marilia.
Thanks, Vlad, and good morning, good afternoon to all. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. Marco Civil has finally been approved by the lower house in the Brazilian parliament. It's going to be examined in Senate. If it's approved in Senate, it will be approved and sanctioned by the Brazilian president probably by the end of the year. And what is the importance of the approval of this bill in Brazil? First of all, I think it's a showcase for two reasons. Firstly, because of the substance of the issues that it addresses, which are some of the key issues that are being discussed in terms of regulation of the internet. Marco Civil has a very strong provision about network neutrality, for instance, which is part of the regulation of Chile, of the Netherlands, and now it will be part of the regulation in Brazil. So network neutrality basically says that the provider should not discriminate against different types of internet traffic. So if you provide some kind of speed, of bandwidth speed, you should be able to download music or videos or text or anything you want to access using that speed, that amount of bandwidth that was hired by your provider. So it's not up for the provider to choose what you will access, but you can access freely any kind of content and application. And of course, this is very important for digital inclusion, especially in developing countries that have lower bandwidth. And it's also very important for users and consumers' rights. So it was a great victory in Brazil that network neutrality was addressed and included in the bill. Another very important point of the bill regards intermediary liability, which is a huge discussion in many different jurisdictions. The solution that the Marco Civil has found was to consider that intermediaries, the platforms such as Google or YouTube, would only be held liable by content that was uploaded by third parties in the face of a judicial order to remove that content that was not attended by the platforms. And we believe that this is very important to uphold freedom of expression, because if people complained and the content was removed upfront, then this would probably hamper freedom of expression and freedom of information. So it was something really interesting that the bill has approved. Now you need to have a judicial order in order to remove content. Of course, there are a few exceptions to that, and copyright protected content is an exception, and it will be addressed in a different bill. And of course, the third very important substantial issue was privacy. And privacy was reinforced in the bill, especially after the Snowden revelations. The government introduced several provisions to protect users' privacy, including the relationship that Brazilian users have with platforms such as Google and Facebook. So the Brazilian law will apply to the commercial relationships that we establish with these platforms. And it also has a controversial provision on data retention. So metadata of access to ISPs and to access to platforms will be kept by the providers for an amount of time for judicial and political investigation to be held if needed. So in terms of substance, we think that it was a very interesting bill that sets a benchmark not only for the region, but for global discussions as well. But in terms of process, it's what I wanted to highlight, because this bill, it was a response from the Brazilian civil society in the face of some other criminal provisions that wanted to over-criminalize some activities on the internet. For instance, if you unblock a platform to access some content that your provider did not at first allow you to access, you could be sent to jail for that. So there were a lot of these provisions in the Brazilian Congress, and the Brazilian users started to push on these bills back and say that, no, we want a bill that would grant us rights and make clear what are our responsibilities before we start to criminalize issues and behaviors online. And this is what happened. And the government decided to discuss this bill online in a totally open and collaborative manner. So the bill was drafted through a process of public consultation in which people pointed out which were the topics that they wanted to include in the bill, which were the rights that they deemed more important to them, and network neutrality was very highly ranked among those rights. And after the bill was drafted by the government, it was put again under public consultation before it was forwarded to Congress. So it was a bill that was very much discussed in society, and henceforth, it has a lot of legitimacy when it arrived in Congress. It was discussed for 2 years. Last year, the Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff put it under constitutional urgency, which meant that it had to be voted very soon, otherwise it could block other votings in Congress, and it was approved last week. Of course, we still have to wait for the final result after the voting in the Senate, but the Senate is a much less complicated house in terms of public interest and different pressures that they have. So we believe that it will be easier to approve the bill in the Senate now, and it will be a large victory not only for Brazil, but we believe also for the international community. It was a bill that received a large support from the internet community, from other governments, from the academia. They sent letters of support and did academic analysis of the bill, and it is considered a very progressive and sound bill to regulate the internet and establish rights and responsibilities. If you want, I can put the text of the bill that we are finishing translated to English online, so other people can take a look and consult. That's it. Over to you, Vlada. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilia. Excellent summary. I suppose the timing of Marco Civil is also somehow linked to Net Mundial, and will definitely strengthen Brazil's position in the whole process or its credibility moving ahead, probably finding the zone of possible agreement. We've seen on the first slide that Brazil is probably the one who is closest to the zone of possible agreement and now catalyzing discussions of others. We have some questions from Susan and others on this, but let us go through the whole review, and then we'll get back to specific questions. So Marilia will stay with us till the end and respond to this question as well. Susan, I've noted the question, and we'll put it back. Moving on or backwards, because I see I've skipped one point, which was the ICANN's high-level panel, which had its meeting in the US at the end of February, first days of March. So we didn't cover it basically on the previous occasion. The ICANN's panel on global internet cooperation and governance mechanisms came up with a contribution, with a summary and a contribution to Net Mundial, which basically boils down to, as I said, 11 principles, out of which I'll just outline some: participation or inclusiveness in the process, diversity of the cultures and interests, collaboration in sense of the bottom-up decision-making, human rights, freedoms online, transparency of the process, and so on, and a number of roadmap suggestions, including the importance of national and regional IG, internet governance structures, and as well internet governance forum, regional national forums in any kind of a format. The importance of ICANN globalization as one of the next steps, and also that's quite interesting is strengthening the stakeholders, the capacities of the stakeholders to be able to get involved in the internet governance process. Moving on, we had a meeting of the regular meeting of ICANN in Singapore, and in a way, the topic of the IANA transition and the NTIA announcement was expected to find its place high on the agenda, so it was. But there was, to some extent, an attempt to try to distinguish between the two. One is IANA transition and the role of the US over IANA function, and the second one is the accountability of ICANN. So the whole ICANN is a policy-making body as well, and these two probably should be in a way distinguished, right? The second topic, or the second interesting aspect of the Singapore meeting, especially for you, might be the developments within the Government Advisory Committee. First of all, a couple of new members have joined, including Croatia, Grenada, and Solomon Islands. So if my counting is correct now, it's over 140 states which are members of the Government Advisory Committee of ICANN, some passive, some active, and there is always an appeal for more governments to get involved into, substantially involved into ICANN's work, especially now when it comes to the new GTLDs, generic top-level domains, where there have been discussions in Singapore that GAC, Government Advisory Committee, should be involved in the early stages of the applications for new generic top-level domains, which might be of interest for government. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been any specific controversies within the Government Advisory Committee meeting, and their communique would have been clear. But just the day before ICANN meeting in Singapore, there was a decision by the board of ICANN that .wine and .van in French about wines will be approved, and that raised some number of ghosts which have been woke up somewhere in Buenos Aires meeting about Amazon related to geographical indications. And a number of states, including the EU and the European states, were strongly against the approval of .wine and .van without specific guidelines on that for how this can be used and operated in future. So basically, this discussion about geographical indications is probably going to go on. There was also an appeal for the countries to update the ISO list, ISO list 3166.2 with regions and subregions, so that any kind of, because ICANN will definitely refer to the ISO list, that might also help ICANN to avoid traps or the problematic new GTLDs without consulting the Government Advisory Committee. This has not, of course, been resolved yet, so we'll follow what will happen. But this is an interesting topic to focus on. Then, out of the topics, yes, the last interesting point of ICANN meeting was the discussion on the formats of the future ICANN meetings, and the suggestion came that ICANN should keep 3 meetings per year. One of which should be like it was, open, big, and inclusive. The other one should be a bit smaller and involve the support organizations and committees, also be open and transparent, of course. And the third one would be, in a way, for the outreach to other communities not already involved in ICANN. Lastly, other 2 topics that are in focus or were in focus in March. Again, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is really being strongly discussed around, not only as a technology, as a concrete technology like Bitcoin, but as a concept of a digital money based on such foundations. So, for instance, we've learned that Russia 2 months ago has discussed it and decided to, in a way, ban Bitcoin as a currency, while Japan decided to put Bitcoin under the Japanese tax system. At the same time, Goldman Sachs, there is a text on their position that considering that Bitcoin should not be considered as a currency, and they say that Bitcoin is somewhere on the edge of between being a currency, commodity, and a financial asset. So in a way, we will more and more going to see discussions about Bitcoin and similar concepts of the digital money. Lastly, the censorship in Turkey has been really in focus. It started with the DNS filtering, filtering of the domain name addresses, especially Twitter, later on YouTube. When the techie-savvy opposition turned to using the IP addresses, IP numbers, instead of DNS addresses, then the Turkish authorities went into censorship of or filtering the IP addresses. Now, of course, there are many other ways to surpass the filtering, and like the Tor system. So it's in a way the constant battle between the government and the activists in finding the way to censor and finding the way to avoid the censorship. But in a way, the whole situation is interesting and provoking with regards to the fact that Turkey is hosting the Internet Governance Forum in September. And there are already some discussions within the multi-stakeholder advisory group of the IGF about that. At the end of the March survey, we had a couple of events with regards to the Geneva Internet Platform. Jovan was at the panel on cyber surveillance with regards to Snowden affairs, NSA affairs. It was a very interesting panel within the Geneva Internet Film Festival and Forum on Human Rights. So in a way, this discussion on surveillance and NSA is moving out of the Internet governance circles only. The online course in Internet governance for diplomats is moving on, and this week we had very good discussions on net neutrality, which Marilia already mentioned, and the Twitter Geneva GIP has been established. Jovan, do you want brief comment on the previous GIP activities, GIP activities, and human rights?
Hi, Lara, you can hear me, I guess? Yes. Well, GIP, Geneva Internet Platform, we have quite dynamic online course, just-in-time course, with close to 20 students, diplomats from Geneva, and we try to discuss not only substantive issues on internet governance, but also the policy processes. And this is going quite well. I attended the cyber surveillance session at the Geneva Film Festival, and it was interesting because it was the end of so-called Human Rights Month in Geneva, which usually starts with the Human Rights Council. The meeting, Human Rights Council, like ICANN, you see, have 3 meetings per year, and one is held in March. And I noticed that online privacy, mainly internet, is moving more and more in the human rights activities. And what I noticed is that you have more and more lobbies moving around during this meeting of Human Rights Council. The film festival session was very interesting. There was a stand accessing remotely from London, from Ecuadorian mission. And one point which I try to highlight is the need for some sort of new social contract that we need, because the question of surveillance is not only the question of NSA, but it is in the core of the economic model that we have today. And in a way, we tacitly accept to share the information. Therefore, the blaming, especially when it comes to obvious the economic question, is difficult to attribute, but there is a need to have informed decision. And that for example, I myself would mind giving up my data for data mining in exchange for example, translate Google, because I have always problems with languages, and it is very useful and enabling tool for me. But that decision has to be, and this sort of contract has to be more transparent and clear than those end-user agreements with a small thing. I would like also to congratulate Renalia, who is today with us for election on the ICANN Board of Directors. ICANN Board of Directors will get a great person in Frank with a lot of experience, dynamism, ideas, and academic background. While I'm on the Geneva Internet Platform, there are 2 points that I would like to highlight. One is our data mining research on Net Mundial. We are now in the 3rd week of analyzing the submissions to the Net Mundial. We did linguistical analysis, we are doing cognitive and emotional analysis, and hopefully next week on the 8th of April, when we will launch the Geneva Internet Platform, we'll have the so-called Draft to Sao Paulo Declaration based on data mining. The idea is to show the power of data mining for public institutions, because it is mainly used now by private sector and some governments. But in order to make more inclusive and fairer policy processes in diplomacy, it is important that governments in international organizations have possibility to use data mining. On the 8th of April, if you are based in Geneva, please join us. We will have the Internet Governance Bazaar starting at 12 o'clock till 1 o'clock. Official opening of the Geneva Internet Platform between 1 and 2. And then there will be exhibition, the Internet Panoramic View with international organizations based in Geneva, and the afternoon session dedicated to techniques and tools and processes used for data mining of these 188 submissions and how we came to the final draft declaration. Vlad, over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. With that, we are basically moving to briefly looking ahead what's happening in April. And while you're on Net Mundial, and we have Marilia also here, reminder that we had last week, we had a special webinar about Net Mundial with the guests from the organizing committee and from ICANN. The summary, the digest, and the video of that webinar will be available on our web very soon. So I strongly encourage you to read and take a look at the recording. In brief, what Raul and Rodrigo conveyed as a message was that, or a summary, was that it will be about 800 people expected in Sao Paulo. At the end, seems like most of those that have applied will have their place. About 200 representatives of governments will be there, with 1, 2, maximum 3 persons per government. In case of the ministerial level, 3. Several dozens from international organizations, and about 500 from other stakeholders, civil society, technical community, corporate sector, and academia. Call for hubs has been opened, and Marilia can also remind on that. They informed us that the format of the Net Mundial meeting will be a single-track discussion on principles and roadmaps. There will be no parallel sessions, and it will be mostly based on the contributions. There have been over 180 contributions received, and that's what, as Jovan mentioned, we are basically now analyzing the content, data mining, and the analysis of the whole set of contributions. As the expectations, they said that they do not expect a revolutionary outcome out of Net Mundial, but they hope that the outcome would be a common document that can set up the ground for further discussions within the IGF and other ITU and other internet governance related forums. Marilia, maybe a few short notes from your side based on Net Mundial, where we are and what would you expect?
Well, actually, I am here in CGIDR in São Paulo. This is the last meeting of the Multi-Stakeholder Executive Committee that is responsible for the agenda of Net Mundial. And we are meeting now here after reading all the 180 contributions that were sent to Net Mundial that you have just mentioned. So we went through the contributions and we are trying to synthesize them and extract from them what is the common ground, what are the possible solutions and consensus that the actors have identified to produce an initial document that will serve as the base for discussions in Net Mundial. As you said, we will have only 2 days of discussions. It will be just one track. And we figured that it was really important for us to have at least an initial paper to start with. So basically what we are doing here today is the second day of the meeting. We have divided into principles, a group that work with principles, a group that work with roadmaps, and now these two groups will be joined together now to analyze this final document. And the document will be sent to another committee of Net Mundial, which is the high-level multi-stakeholder committee, for analysis, and after that, this document will be put online for public comment. So you will be able to access it and read it and make your comments before Net Mundial. And so when people arrive here in São Paulo and they are on the ground, it is expected that they will have a very clear idea of what will be discussed and what they want to improve on the document. And we believe that this way discussions will be more productive here in São Paulo. We're looking forward to meet you here. As you said, the call for hubs is still open. It's very important that people send their intentions to organize hubs to Net Mundial as soon as possible, so they can receive the support and training from the Secretariat. All the support will be provided to hub organizers. They will be able to connect to Net Mundial, follow the streaming of the discussion, and also be able to intervene. It will be not only remotely watching the meeting, but also sending questions and comments and being able also to participate on the drafting of the document. So I believe it's a very good opportunity to participate as well. So that's about Net Mundial. That's it from my side. I would be glad to follow up with Veronica on the question that she has asked. I already answered on the chat, and we can follow up about that later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilia. In the meantime, I've posted another question from Susan regarding tobacco civil, so you can also answer in chat, but at the end we can get back to that in voice as well. There was a brief review of Net Mundial. Reminder, it's 23rd and 24th of April in Sao Paulo, and so it will be the remote participation, online participation will be available. Second important event of the April has just started basically on 30th of March, but lasts till 10th of April in Dubai, which is the ITU World Telecom Development Conference 2014. The focus seems for these couple of days to be following the comments and discussions over there on security, cybersecurity, diversity, and multilingualism that will follow. And during our May Geneva briefing, we'll reflect back on the developments with the ITU WTDC. OneNet is basically warming up for Net Mundial, but also discussing its possible role beyond Net Mundial. And lastly, but not the least, it's a Freedom Online conference which is taking place in Tallinn in Estonia, 28th to 29th of April. And according to the agenda, we will be discussing human rights, freedoms, and openness, but some specific focus will be put also on the roles and responsibilities of the business corporate sector in internet governance. Veronica reminded in the chat, when we were talking about March development, to mention that Council of Europe hosted its high-level event in Graz to discuss its upcoming internet governance strategy for 2016-2019, and she provided the link to the discussions, which is very appreciated. Veronica, thank you for sharing that. Before we move to questions, briefly what we can expect from Geneva Internet Platform. Jovan mentioned most of that already, and that includes the launch of the GIP in Geneva on 8th of April. So any one of you who is in Geneva on 8th of April, you're most welcome. We'll have, as Jovan mentioned, not only the launch, but also the result of the data mining exercise and research on Net Mundial contributions, where we're going to try to present the draft output document, or the initial document for discussions for Net Mundial based on the contributions and analysis of the words and statements of different parties. And we'll also provide an interesting internet landscape exhibition where we're basically mapping all the institutions that are in some way related to internet governance. We'll provide that map also on the GIP website soon, kind of Google map, where you can easily search on a global map and especially on Geneva map, what are the important institutions with regards to the internet governance. 23rd, 24th of April, as we said, is the Net Mundial in Sao Paulo. Diplo will be there. We'll try to provide feedbacks through social media, but as well, we'll also try to provide some blogs and definitely feed into the next Geneva Internet Briefing webinar, which is taking place on 6th of May. So make sure that you're with us also on 6th of May. Now, that would be basically on the review, and moving to questions. I've noted a couple of questions already. While I'm going through the other questions, I would ask Marilia briefly to respond also, well, to Veronica's questions. You already responded in chat, but you might refer again shortly. But there is also Susan's question regarding Marco Civil, and she said, can you please describe the special court described in the second part of Marco Civil presentation related to the ISP liability? She's very curious to hear about what this special court is, given recent legislative news in New Zealand dealing with cyberbullying, and reminding on what Veronica asked, just to read it for those that are going to listen to the recording. Veronica said the Brazil case and the success of Marco Civil, just wondering whether the fact that Brazil is one of the founders of the Open Government Partnership, which have openness, transparency, citizen engagement, and innovation at the core of it, might have pushed for this success. So to what extent this might have had any influence on both process and content of Marco Civil. Marilia, briefly reflections on these two questions.
Thank you, Vlada. About the public administration, it's important to mention that Marco Civil has a specific chapter about the role and the responsibility of the public administration. So, for instance, it says that public authorities should make all the data available online in open formats, which are machine readable, and we know how important this is to transparency. It also sets a preference of the public administration for open technologies. So if the government wants to buy hardware or software, it should prefer open software, open hardware, something that is auditable. And this is also very important in the context of the recent revelations of Snowden affairs and so on. It also creates a responsibility for interoperability between systems and e-government platforms. And this is also something very important. And of course, I think that this reasoning has a lot to do with the participation of Brazil in the Open Government Partnership. We have recently also enacted a transparency law, which FGV is auditing right now. And so by the end of the year, we will have some news about how the law has been implemented in some of the states of the Federation. It's a recent law. There are uneven implementations, but it's a step ahead. And Brazil is working on transparency, and its participation in the partnership has a lot to do with that. Regarding the other question regarding the court, it's not a special court. Any case that is presented in the face of any judge will be judged against Marco Civil provisions. And what the provision says is that the content should not be removed unless there is a judicial order to remove this content. This order doesn't need to come from a special court. Any low-level judge can emit an order to remove content, and if the platform fails to respond to that court order, then it will be held liable. Of course, there is a small case or exception, which is the period of elections that are coming now in Brazil. So during elections, it's another law that regulates content related to candidates and to campaigns, and this law is much more strict when it comes to defamation, for instance. It allows for content to be removed fast, so it will not damage the image of candidates during elections. So of course, during this 2-month period of elections and campaigns, the judges will have to deal with this different and a specific electoral law, and it will go to the upper electoral court for a judgment, and they will be able to analyze if the content should be removed or not. But for everyday situation, what will apply is Marco Civil, and any judge will be able to enact this law. Just a small comment on what you said regarding the IANA functions and Net Mundial. I think that Net Mundial will be a very important place to discuss the transition, especially to state that the future of the IANA functions is something that should be discussed by ICANN community, of course, but should be discussed beyond ICANN community. This is something that is in the international agenda for a long time. It's part of the WSIS discussions, and I think that the broader community has a stake on that, and it's important that this is very clear in Net Mundial. So it's an opportunity that we have to participate in the upcoming debate. Over to you, Vlada. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilia. We have a question from Esqua, which reflects the enhanced cooperation. We basically mentioned a bit during the previous webinar because the CSTD working group on enhanced cooperation took place in February. But in very brief, that was supposed to be the last meeting of the working group on enhanced cooperation. Unfortunately, the whole week went and they didn't manage to agree, except to agree that they did agree. And there were basically two very distinctive positions. One, intergovernmental in sense of a need for an intergovernmental agency, an increased role of the ITU, or a kind of framework of intergovernmental convention or something like that. And the second one was towards a multi-stakeholder model of internet governance, where, as they said, would be an equal footing for all stakeholders. So the question is how to reconcile this multi-stakeholder approach and specific public policy making responsibility of the government. One comment from that or after that meeting was there is a need to abandon long entrenched positions and negotiate in good faith to find the good, middle ground. I think there was a quote by Richard Hill, if I'm not wrong. Basically, the only agreement that came was that there would be another meeting at the beginning of May. So the last additional meeting of the CSTD working group on enhanced cooperation just before the meeting of the CSTD, which I think is on 17th of May. So there are some hopes that the working group will manage to bridge this gap and to try to find a common position. There was a comment from Veronica asking whether we are going to be in Tallinn for the Freedom Online conference. We have unfortunately not. We'll be focused on NetMundial. But Veronica, if you are there, you're most welcome to share feedbacks and inputs to us, and then we'll be glad to also summarize them for the May Geneva briefings. To read the updates that Veronica and Marilia shared in the chat about the ICANN NOMCOM nominating committee. So it says, ICANN nominating committee encourages everyone interested to submit their statements of interest for the current vacancies within ICANN. Interested individuals are invited to submit an application to the NOMCOM for the following positions: 2 members of the board of directors of ICANN, 2 at-large advisory committee representatives, 1 from Europe and 1 from North America regions, 1 member of the Council of the Generic Name Supporting Organization, 1 member of the Council of the Country Code Names Supporting Organization. Today is the deadline, and more details are available on the ICANN web. Marilia added sharing the transcripts of the seminar promoted by the non-commercial users constituency during ICANN meeting in Singapore, IANA function transitions, enhanced cooperation, and internet principles were topics in focus. The link is in chat window, but we'll also try to share it in our webinar digest after the webinar. And at the end, Marilia also reflected on enhanced cooperation, she said, because she's also the participant in the working group on enhanced cooperation. The summary of the chair of the working group on enhanced cooperation provided a good overview of what the different positions are. Very polarized indeed, but they're interesting and creative proposals emerging. Maybe they deserve more attention of actors. Lastly, Veronica's announcement for the professionals based in Europe interested in ICANN. They can now join individual users association within AIMS, which aims at providing a home for individuals interested in participating in ICANN process, but do not have a home like the institution constituency and so on. So creating opportunities for them to participate, and the web is http:/individualusers.org. We'll also try to share the link in the webinar digest. I think we can stop here. We've gone through March developments. We'll focus on April. it's quite possible that the April developments will, in a way, surprise us, that something else will pop up, as it always happens. In that case, we'll definitely put that on the agenda of the May meeting. So 6th of May is the next Geneva briefing on Internet Governance webinar. In the meantime, 8th of April, Geneva launch of the Geneva Internet Platform. If you're in Geneva, you're most welcome. We might think of another webinar about NetMundial in the meantime. Follow our website and the Twitter and so on. Question from Esqua is there room for convergence between the IGF and enhanced cooperation process during the next 15 months? I would leave the response to that question for May, because NetMundial also and the IGF preparations in May and enhanced cooperation developments in May will probably give us response. So we'll probably reflect on that again in May and in June during the Geneva briefing on Internet Governance. I'll note that question and try to reflect on that once we have maybe more information from the whole process. Thank you for coming. The webinar digest and the video will be available soon on the web. And I hope to see you, if not earlier, then again on 6th of May for the next Geneva briefings on Internet Governance. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Marilia and Jovan, and once again, congratulations to Renato. Goodbye.